Hi, Hannah.
Hi, John.
Why don't we introduce ourselves?
Sure. I'm Hannah Natanson, and I cover education for the Washington Post. And pretty much since I've started, I've had to write about school shootings, from a 7-year-old who shot his teacher in Virginia to this past fall when a 14-year-old shot 2 classmates and 2 teachers in Georgia.
My name is John Woodrow Cox. I'm an enterprise reporter at the Washington Post. I have a focus on narrative reporting. I have reported on school shootings and gun violence, how it affects children for the past 8 years. I wrote a book about this subject, wrote about a school shooting in South Carolina, wrote about the Newtown school shooting, Uvalde, Parkland. I wrote about the mass shooting in Las Vegas. So, this has been a big part of my life and the work that Hannah and I have done together for a long time.
I don't normally ask John to tell me all his work because I have been an avid follower of John's work since college. I would read John's pieces, and it made me want to go into journalism and especially want to come work at the Washington Post for the kind of narrative work that he always did and still does.
Oh, that's very kind, although Hannah is already better than I am. So
that's not that's fake news.
Which is why we work together now. I don't have to try as hard. So we wrote this story that you will hear in a moment, and it's part of our Deep Reads series, which showcases narrative journalism here at the Post. The story is about the ripple effects of the huge number of threats that explode across the country after school shootings, and in this specific case, how that phenomenon played out in one community. So our reporting for this started actually on another story where Hannah and I worked together very closely last year after the Apalachee shooting in Georgia, a case in which a freshman killed 2 students and 2 teachers. And one thing we noticed in the weeks right after that shooting was this just a huge number of threats that were being made against other schools. And a lot of kids were being arrested for making threats mostly on social media. So, Hannah, if you want to talk a little bit about how we launched into trying to quantify that.
So we sort of went about it in 2 ways. One thing is we went to some of the nation's largest school districts. I think we contacted close to 250 of them, and we asked them for data on the number of threats they got in the 2 weeks that followed the last 4 really deadly school shootings, from Apalachee this past year to the Oxford shooting in Michigan in 2021. And so we had all these districts that we sought records from, seeing how many threats came in. And then we also, John and I together, read through 20,000 news articles to try to track how many arrests happened that were reported in the 2 weeks after each of these shootings.
Yeah, and that was a major undertaking. But, what really struck us was there were more threats, but there was a disproportionate increase in arrests. So obviously, we had this big idea. We had all this data. It was national, but it was hard to sort of wrap your mind around, I think, as a reader to say, well, what does this mean? What does this look like? What's context here? So we thought the way to tell this story is through one place. So we came across this case in Volusia County, Florida, where the sheriff there was so fed up that he was actually perp walking children as young as 11 years old.
And just for people who don't know what perp walking is, it's when law enforcement takes someone they're taking into detention or arrest and they release their name publicly, maybe have them walk along and be filmed. So it's a very public outing. And sheriffs, after this shooting and all these threats, were doing this to children.
Yeah, and that's extremely rare. I mean, it's virtually unheard of that you would take somebody who's 11, certainly, or 12 or 13, and publicize their name, their face, put it out there for the world, because they've not been convicted of any crime. So this person is being labeled with whatever you've accused them of forever. So Hannah and I went there to talk to the sheriff, to talk to a school resource officer, to talk to a principal at a school, to talk to some of the students who'd been arrested and outed and perp walked and who had spent, in some cases, 3 weeks in jail. I think every single person we talked to in this story felt like their perspective had been overlooked. Every single one of them.
And I just want to say one thing that John has always done so well and that made me admire his work in the first place is he always talks to the children, the actual children going to school. And so we made sure to do that here, both the children who were arrested for making the threats and the kids who were in school when the threat came in and were terrified, even though it wasn't real, but they didn't know that.
You know, it's really important to me that readers understand their perspective from their perspective, not from everybody else. So, you know, I've always found it maybe to be easier to talk to kids than people might assume. They have a lot to say. They have opinions, even at very, very young ages. They have very clear perspectives on whatever it is that they've gone through. So, you know, I try to be very frank with what it is that I'm doing, who I am. I explain to the kid who I am, what I do. I'll show them articles on my phone. I'll show them my profile page with my photo. And then, you know, I just tell them why I'm there. And I really just try to get them talking sort of generally. I also tell them that I'm not in charge. You know, every adult in their life is in charge of them. I'm not in charge. I'm not an authority figure. If they don't want to answer something, they don't have to. And I tell them that over and over and over again. When I went to Uvalde to write about, you know, the children who were killed there, my very first night there, I met a little girl who'd been across the hallway from the two classrooms where all of her friends were killed. She could hear her best friend dying. And I went there a little less than a month after the shooting. And I met her on the very first night I'm in town. And it was really just for her to get to know me and for her family to get comfortable with me. And within 30 minutes of having met her, she launched into a retelling of that day in great specificity, really detailed. I mean, you know, she told me about hearing her friends scream. She could recognize her voice. And I paused her at one point and said, just so you know, we don't have to talk about this now. We can wait. And she said, no, I want to talk about it now. So that when I talk about, you know, giving children agency, when putting them in charge, that's what that means. Like, it wasn't my job to tell her, this is too soon for us to talk about it. It was just to say, you lead the way. And I think that's, Hannah and I very much took that approach in this story, is just explaining why it is that we're there. And I think we would both attest to this, that we are often the first people in these kids' lives who they are totally willing to open up to.
And that was true here, for sure, I would say. So we reported this story over 4 months, seeking all this data from school districts.
And then we spent a little less than a week down in Florida doing the reporting there in Volusia. It was a very, very, very quick trip, and just sort of it all came together.
So I think I was there Monday to Friday.
Really?
Yeah.
It was, I just know, it was so striking.
It was short.
It was so strikingly short. This is the sort of story that I think you'd think, like, we embedded for like 2 weeks in this place, but it just, like, everybody was cooperative.
Okay, here's our story called Children Joked About School Shootings. Then the sheriff sent them to jail.
The dragnet first snagged a girl named Lori, who was lying in bed amid her stuffed unicorns and Hello Kitty dolls when the ninth grader had what she thought was a funny idea. She opened Instagram and, over a hot pink background, began to type, blowing the SKL up TMR, blowing the school up tomorrow. It was September 10th, 6 days after another 14-year-old was accused of gunning down 2 students and a pair of teachers at Apalachee High in Georgia. At Lori's home in Florida, she posted the message and forgot about it until a few hours later, when a friend urged her to delete what she'd written. It was too late, of course, because the internet is forever, and because, unbeknownst to Lori and hundreds of other kids, law enforcement's tolerance for threats of any kind, made anywhere, by anyone, was nearing zero. The next day, the girl was placed in handcuffs that barely fit her wrists, charged with a felony, and taken to a Volusia County detention center for 3 weeks. The day after that, another 14-year-old was charged for a comment on Instagram that read, "If y'all crybabies don't shut up, I'm going to shoot up your school." The day after that, a 13-year-old was charged for a post on TikTok that read, "I will be shooting up Heritage Middle School on 9/13/24." More threats would rapidly follow in Volusia County and across the country, as if a pathogen had been set loose. An analysis of news reports by the Washington Post found that at least 477 people, 90% of them students, were arrested in the 2 weeks after the Georgia massacre. That's nearly 100 more than in the aftermath of the 3 previous mass school shootings combined. Volusia's elected sheriff, Mike Chitwood, a registered independent and brash Philadelphia native, decided he had had enough. In the past week, he deployed dozens of deputies and spent an extra $21,000 in taxpayer money. On the previous night alone, his office had received 54 tips.
Good afternoon.
At a news conference, he made an announcement.
This is absolutely out of control, and it ends now.
In the same moment, his investigators were tracking down 2 more children, one 13 years old and the other 12.
So what we're going to start doing Monday is, since parents, you don't want to raise your kids, I'm going to start raising them. Every time we make an arrest, your kid's photo is going to be put out there. And if I could do it, I'm going to perp walk your kid so that everybody can see what your kid's up to.
On social media, his ultimatum was a hit. In the weeks ahead, children, parents, teachers, administrators, and police officers all would wrestle with what it meant in real life. A boy named Armando, who was 11, was sleeping with his tan baby blanket when his mom rubbed his shoulder until he opened his eyes. Just past 4 a.m. on September 16th, she told him the police were at the door. He slid on sweatpants and waited in the living room of their Port Orange home while a team in black vests searched his room for guns. Body cam footage shows what happened next to the boy, who, with his mother's permission, the Post is identifying only by his middle name. Armando, a bright, round-faced kid who tends to lose his breath when he talks too fast, sat on the bed beside his mom and listened. The detectives, who had worked the case through the night, knew he had showed off his collection of knives and airsoft guns during a FaceTime call with 3 other kids that weekend. Detectives had already interviewed each of the children, who disagreed on whether Armando claimed the guns were real, or if he threatened to shoot up a school, or if a, quote, hit list he had composed was a joke. He told the investigators, in a voice that had yet to reach puberty, that he was, quote, pretty sure he'd mentioned to his friends that the guns were toys, but he figured they could spot the orange tips that indicate they're not real. Armando swore he didn't threaten to attack any schools. His mom, Jessica, asked about his hit list.
Look at me. Did you say something like that?
No, I swear to God. I didn't.
Did you write a list down?
I didn't, no.
You didn't write a list down?
I did, yes.
The detectives had already found a notebook with names jotted down in black marker. One of them asked,
Did you joke and say that it was a hit list or a kill list?
I jokingly said it was a hit list in a joking manner. But then,
His mom interjected.
Does this look like a joke to you?
I'm not sure if you told them or not.
12 minutes later, one of the detectives told Armando that they would have to arrest him. The boy's mouth fell open, but no words came out. He slumped forward onto the bed and cried into a blanket.
Breathe. Okay.
Later, in the kitchen, Armando, coughing and hyperventilating, placed his hands behind his back. His mom moaned, a hand covering her mouth as the handcuffs clicked shut. In a video released later that day, he steps from the back of an SUV, his wrists still cuffed.
Right this way, young man.
A deputy says, as the boy quietly shuffles down the sidewalk, his white Nike flip-flops scraping the pavement. Inside the building, his ankles are shackled before he is ushered into an empty holding cell.
All right.
The man asks,
You have any questions?
no, sir.
All right.
The video, posted by the Volusia Sheriff's Office to YouTube and Instagram, has been viewed more than 170,000 times. And nearly all of the most liked comments praise the sixth graders' public shaming. On another day, on another campus, in another part of Volusia, another educator was reckoning with the same epidemic. Principal Jason Watson opened the email just before 1 p.m. His heart beat loud in his ears. The message read, "I will be going to Atlantic High School and shooting every cisgendered person I see with my dad's guns. In fact, I am already parked nearby in a red Honda Civic with some handguns. When this is all over, the entire country shall remember my name." There was no time to read it twice. The principal clicked a series of keys on his computer, placing Atlantic High into a hold. Wall alarms throughout campus flashed purple, part of the security operation that cost the district $6.9 million per year. Alerts buzzed on computers and phones, telling students to stay inside their classrooms, asking teachers to close their doors and check the locks. Watson yanked the walkie-talkie from his belt. He asked his crisis team, "Where are you guys? I got something." What unfolded that day now happens so often, it has become a part of the landscape of American education. Educators buy expensive alert technologies. They hire large staffs or even create departments devoted to security. They start the school year with assemblies teaching students where and how to hide. It's putting a huge drain on school administrators who are already overloaded, said Kenneth Trump, president of the consulting firm National School Safety and Security Services. Inside Atlantic High, staff and students didn't know the threat was fake or that the person who made it would never get caught. April Travis paused her lesson on the principles of teaching. She looked out at the room of seniors who'd signed up for the class because they might want to become educators. What if this time, she thought, someone really had a gun? On the opposite side of campus, math teacher Caleb Rich crossed to his classroom door. As he pulled a black shade over the window, he pictured Atlantic's campus, its tall chain-link fencing, its single entry point protected by a security guard, the heavy metal door against his palms. In her theater class, 17-year-old Oriah Wallace put down her mechanical pencil. She mouthed the phrase she repeats during every lockdown, "Everybody is safe until we're told otherwise." And senior Dominic Nash, 18, recalled all the times he'd seen Atlantic High lock its doors or halt class for threats, starting when he was a freshman and a boy showed up to campus with a pistol tucked in his pants. By this, his senior year, he knew exactly what to do when the wall alarms blazed different colors. Purple, like today, meant stay where you are. Green meant evacuate. Red, a lockdown, meant leave your desk and huddle beneath the shark sticker, a tiny version of the Atlantic mascot placed in the area of every classroom where students are most protected from gunfire. On his first day behind bars, Armando ate goldfish crackers and learned that most of the other boys were there for stealing guns or beating people bloody. One teenager threatened to kill him, Armando said, but he didn't really mean it. Nearly all the other inmates were older than he was. To him, some of them looked like grown-ups. In his cell at the Volusia Regional Juvenile Detention Center, Armando said, he found, quote, "Hail Satan," written on the wall, a message he covered in toothpaste and toilet paper. When he noticed an upside-down cross above the door, Armando, just over 5 feet tall, stepped back and jumped, then kept jumping until he knocked it down. He placed the cross over his bed, right side up. Armando, who said he'd never thrown a punch or taken one, got slapped in the back of the neck by a cellmate who wanted to annoy him. Another teen peed in a soap bucket the boys all shared. Armando witnessed at least 3 fights, he said, and, during one, he caught a stray fist in the chest. Every day, he sat on his bed and cried. Eventually, though, he learned how to get by, figuring that, quote, just being nice and existing was the best approach. He gave away milk and oatmeal and, once, a brownie, hoping the generosity would help him make friends or at least avoid enemies. Other children ordered his cellmate to stop bothering him, he said, and the teen who threatened to kill him instead looked out for him, promising to leave Armando his bank of phone minutes if he got out first. He learned how to shuffle cards and play spades, and he liked the guards, who sometimes gave him Kit Kat bars when he volunteered to mop or pick up trash. One of them nicknamed him Dorito after mispronouncing his last name. That made him laugh. Each morning, an older teen who called himself a preacher prayed with Armando, and each night he talked to God alone. He asked, "Please keep me safe." By then, his arrest had made national news, drawing widespread praise online and comments that included, "I support this 100%, get this thug out of here," and "Don't ask them if they're all right, just book them." Experts in child psychology and criminology condemned Chitwood's approach. Deborah Weisbrot, a psychiatry professor at Stony Brook University and author of a 20-year study on students who make school threats, said this: "There's absolutely no evidence that this is going to be helpful in reducing the level of threats. I do think it's possible that could further humiliate and embarrass a child, and they could go further underground in whatever the distress was that led them to make the threat in the first place." Chitwood anticipated blowback but dismissed what little he heard. Profane and mustachioed, the 61-year-old had long welcomed controversy. In 2023, he led a public campaign against white supremacists he frequently referred to as, quote, scumbags. To critics of his approach with the accused children, he pointed to the precipitous drop in arrests after he began publicizing names and faces. From 5, the week he started to perp walk the children, to 7 the week after that, to 2 the week after that, to 1 the week after that, to 0 the week after that. He said,
I have to worry about the 99% of students who are going to school to do the right thing. I have to worry about teachers, administrators, and parents. Somebody else could worry about little Johnny or little Janie. I cannot have schools and after-school activities and parents and teachers running around in fear.
At Armando's home, his mom, Jessica, struggled to process what had happened. Along with his perp walk video, the sheriff's office had shared images of the array of airsoft guns he'd spent years collecting. Jessica resented that her son, an honor roll student not allowed to watch R-rated movies, had been branded as a would-be school shooter, potentially for life. She rejected the notion popular among online commenters that she was to blame or had given her son an irresponsible number of weapons. It was not illegal, she noted, for Armando to own the airsoft guns or plunk cans with them in the backyard. Several didn't fire anyway. They tried to make him out to be this little monster, she said of the sheriff's office. His treatment galled her, in large part because of an incident that had happened the year before. In late March 2023, according to an incident report, a teacher at his elementary school had found another kill list, and the only name on it was Armando's. In that case, the report said, the sheriff's office determined the girl who made the list had no history of disciplinary issues and may not have understood what she had done. Case closed. Jessica can't understand why the same sheriff's office treated two similar allegations so differently. Chitwood said, "What occurred this year has nothing to do with what happened the year before. This year it was out of control, and we announced what we were going to do. They were all given a warning." In the detention center, Armando knew nothing about the other case because his mom had never told him he'd been named on a supposed kill list. She wanted to preserve his innocence. As the days passed, Armando began to wonder how long he would remain there. He tried to ignore the kid who told him he'd never go free. One day, he said, a guard approached. "You're on the TV," the man said. It had been 2 days since the video of Armando's arrest began to spread online, and the leaders of Volusia County schools had decided to leave no doubt for the rest of their students about what would happen if they, too, threatened a campus. Early on the afternoon of September 18th, the principal at Taylor Middle High School, in a rural swath of the county 25 miles from the beach, announced over the intercom that teachers were about to play a clip of Chitwood from the recent news conference. The teens watched and listened as the sheriff delivered his ultimatums.
If you don't want to raise your kids, I'm going to start raising them. Every time we make an arrest.
Zero tolerance, felony charges, faces on posters, arrest, recorded, and shared.
If I could do it, I'm going to perp walk your kid so that everybody can see what your kid's up to.
Just then, the deputy assigned to the school, Christopher Newman, got a call from the sheriff's office. The FBI, which has spent millions to monitor social media for potential danger, had detected a threat against Taylor made minutes earlier by someone on campus. Newman radioed the principal, and the school was placed on a hold. The cell phone used to make the threat was traced to an address where 4 of Taylor's students lived. At the time, Newman said, each was in a different classroom. He knew 2 of them. They were cousins, a boy and a girl. Newman decided to start with the boy, rushing toward a distant red brick building where the 16-year-old attended classes. On his way, it struck him just how brazen these students had been. A threat made against the school, at the school, immediately after a warning about the consequences of threatening a school. He thought, good God, are you kidding me? In the boy's classroom, he snatched his backpack and ordered him outside. Newman took the teen's phone. "I'ma shoot up the school," his cousin, the girl, had joked on Snapchat, sending him an identical note in a direct message. His reply? Same. Newman left him with another deputy and headed across campus to retrieve his cousin. He unlocked the door to classroom 5115 and spotted the girl, who was 17, in the middle of the room, according to body cam footage. Newman knew her. She had anger issues and used to get in fights, but he'd seen her make progress. Newman sighed and gathered her bag.
I need your computer too.
She stood and walked to the classroom door, pausing next to a sign that read, "Dream Big." She placed her hands behind her back. She laughed.
It's not. This is not even the time to ever joke about that.
Me and my cousin were texting by ourselves, she said.
When you use words like "I'm gonna shoot up the school," the FBI picks up on that.
He replied as she was led down the hallway. Newman, a school resource deputy for 18 years, had never wanted any other role in law enforcement. Bearded and broad-chested, the father of 4 knew he could look intimidating, so Newman wore googly eyes on his body camera. The kids called him Depp. Nothing had changed the dynamic among students or the complexities of his work more than social media, and the episode at Taylor reminded him, yet again, just how easily it could be weaponized to paralyze a campus. What motivates students to menace schools online is typically trivial. A desire to impress classmates they like or frighten ones they don't, or, in many cases, just to get a day off from classes. Only in the rarest cases do they intend to harm anyone. Robert Tressman, a psychiatry professor at Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine, said, "People will say things to a computer that they would never say directly to another person in front of them. Certainly teenagers and preteens act without really understanding the consequences of their behavior. Increasingly, though, law enforcement officials have more sophisticated tools to trace the threats and less willingness to let them go unpunished." Kenneth Trump, the school security expert, said, "There is such frustration. People are frustrated about not being able to just stop these once and for all. So it becomes, we're going to arrest everybody, whether they're 18 or they're 9. Much of that frustration, Newman understood, stemmed from the profound effect those threats could have on other students. Days before the incident at Taylor, he'd responded to a lockdown at a middle school where someone reported seeing a gunman. There was none, but that news had not reached the boy who burst out of a classroom, so overcome with panic that it triggered an asthma attack. Now, as Newman sorted through what came next for the cousins, he worried how the upheaval they'd provoked would impact the 1,000 other students on campus. One of them, Journey Cope, was in science class when she heard that a girl had showed up to school with a gun and a list of kids she didn't like. The rumor about the gun and the list was not true, but the 13-year-old didn't know that. She froze at her desk because a week before, the girl had texted Journey, calling her, quote, fake. The angry text turned into angry calls, and now Journey couldn't stop wondering if her name was on the list. Journey had no space in her mind for science. She closed her eyes and put her head on the desk. Some days later, her mother called her over and hit play on a Facebook video posted by Chitwood. There was the girl she'd bickered with and a boy, her cousin, their hands shackled, stepping from the back of a van and trailing down the same path Armando had walked. In the video, the deputy asked the boy,
Think you made a wise decision today?
"Think you made a wise decision today?" The boy shook his head. Bent over her mom's iPhone, Journey smiled. It felt good to watch. Armando returned home to a slip-and-slide party, a new dog named Honey, and, after 12 days behind bars, a mother convinced he shouldn't have served a single day. Another boy on the FaceTime call with him had since been arrested, accused of telling other children in a group chat that Armando planned to kill them. When detectives confronted him, the 11-year-old acknowledged that he'd lied. He had wanted to scare people. His arrest didn't exonerate Armando, a spokesman for the sheriff's office said. Though Armando has always denied threatening to shoot up a school, he confirmed to detectives that he'd written a, quote, hit list as a joke. Now, 4 months later, Armando says he thinks the list was the other boy's idea. Whether the rest of the children encouraged him to go through with it, the spokesman said, did not matter. A prosecutor offered Armando a diversion program that would wipe the felony charge from his record with no admission of guilt if he completed community service, said his mom, Jessica. She considered going to trial, but an attorney told her he could face 3 years in a juvenile facility 7 hours away. She couldn't bear the risk. Armando switched to homeschooling and tried to stay busy. He signed up for a flag football team with kids who didn't judge him. He discovered the Harry Potter movie series and became so infatuated that he started fashioning elaborate wands out of paper towels, glue, and paint. He imagined joining the rodeo and moving to the country.
I wish I was younger.
I wish I was younger, he said, because he wanted to be the kid he used to be. A week after his release, his family took him to a seafood restaurant that overlooked the water, but he had to leave, convinced that everyone there knew who he was. He had a recurring nightmare, imagining himself drowning in the hull of a ship. He refused to sleep in his own bed, instead spending each night on the couch next to his dog. He said,
I didn't want to go back into the room because that's where I was last time, pretty much right before I was arrested. That's where I was sleeping. And I just don't really want to, I'm scared something else is bad is going to happen if I sleep in there.
He's pleaded with his mom and her fiancé to move them away. He can't shake the fear that people in Volusia are, quote, disgusted by him. A fixation that led Armando to decide he would change his name. His mom didn't argue. She knew that the worst moment of her son's life had become a tale of caution for other children. For Tori Caspert, who also lives in Port Orange, the story was too unnerving to ignore. Before school one morning, she noticed a news segment about Armando on TV. We're watching this, Caspert told her twin sons, both 13, who went to Creekside Middle with Armando. The boys, sprawled across her lap in their pajamas, sat up. They thought they recognized him, even with his face blurred in the clip. Caspert looked at her sons, both honor roll students. She couldn't imagine them wanting to shoot up a school. Then she looked at the TV. She would never have suspected an 11-year-old either. If you ever do a threat like this, or anything like this, she recalled telling them, I will let Sheriff Chitwood come over here. I will let him do it to you too. You understand me? 30 miles southwest, another Volusia parent named Alan took a screenshot of a Facebook post about Armando's arrest, including the boy's mugshot, and texted it to his teenage sons. Alan wrote, just letting you know not to be stupid. No jokes. Alan, a middle school teacher, felt conflicted. All 3 of his children had been locked in their classrooms because of threats, and in his own school, he'd witnessed the panic and fear they could cause. Even so, he didn't support what the sheriff had done to Armando. I don't know if he was joking or not, Alan said, but he's 11. The day after Armando's arrest, Alan tried to explain the stakes to his sons on the drive home from school. He was especially worried about his 16-year-old, who is autistic and suffers from depression. During the past year, he'd been placed into protective custody 4 times. If they're going to do this to a little kid, a high school kid has got no chance, he recalled telling his boys in the car. We know, they said. We're not dumb. 1 week later, deputies knocked on their door. His younger son, Alan learned, had gotten into a confrontation over a video game. The teen had posted a message in all caps to Instagram and Facebook, along with a stock image of a Glock. Quote, "If people keep threatening me, I will do some. Keep trying me. I dare you," the teen wrote, misspelling the word dare. As deputies led the teen away, Alan headed to his own bedroom, unlocked the closet door, and opened the gun safe. He didn't know that his son would spend the next 15 days in the detention center. He didn't know that the sheriff would decide not to publicize the teen's identity because of his mental health problems. But he did know that parents often underestimated how desperate and dangerous, to themselves or to others, their children could be. Alan said, "Do I think my son would shoot up a school? No. Even if it's a 1% chance, I'm not going to risk it." So he packed up his guns and took them away. The next day, another threat spread through the county, this time from a person who claimed to be armed with several handguns. Another 6 Volusia campuses locked their doors. Another 300 teachers tried to keep teaching as if nothing was wrong. Another 5,000 students waited to find out if, this time, the threat was real. This story was reported and written by Hannah Natanson and me, John Woodrow Cox. Roseanne Niklawi also contributed to the reporting. Music and sound production by Bishop Sand.